Realizing it was time to close things down, I knew I had to get out of the master control booth before anyone caught on and shut me down. If I moved quickly, I could switch off the live assist mode and set the system back to its fully automated broadcast mode. Our local TV audience had seen enough for one night. Once I got the system running smoothly again, I could finally leave and get a drink, which I desperately needed. I was fully aware there would be consequences, both at home and from the general manager and the FCC. But by then I felt so trapped that I didn't care anymore. Like I said, I needed a drink. I drove over to Frankie's on Roswell Road, a popular local sports bar, and ordered a beer. As I sat there watching the end of the Monday night football game and downing a few more beers, I noticed the bar was buzzing with chatter. I knew it was about me. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to know I had stirred up conversation. Fortunately, no one dragged me into their discussions, so I drank alone, silently observing the Saints crushing the Falcons. By the time 10:30 p.m. rolled around, I was feeling numb. The game ended with my team losing, New Orleans 23, Atlanta 3. The Saints seemed especially driven, probably because it was their first game back in their stadium since the hurricane. They outplayed the Falcons completely. Our station aired the game along with ESPN, since we were one of the involved teams. I asked the bartender if I could leave my car in the parking lot overnight, and he agreed. Given my state, it was a wise choice. Seeing how I was, he called a cab for me since I lived just a short distance away in a quiet residential area of Sandy Springs. And that pretty much wraps up the end of this story. But to understand how I ended up in this mess, we need to start from the beginning. My name is Elliot Whitaker. I work as a broadcast engineer for WBDK, a local CBS affiliate in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a graduate degree from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science, along with another degree in broadcast technologies. I am highly qualified and have held several challenging positions in my field. I've been in the industry for 22 years, working at various TV stations along the East Coast before settling in Atlanta 5 years ago. In case you're wondering, I'm 46 years old with dark hair that's starting to gray at the temples. I've never felt the need to hide the gray, but I do touch up my small mustache to keep it from showing signs of aging. I'm 63 inches and weigh around 190 pounds, though I haven't checked in a while. I consider myself moderately attractive, though I'm no Noah Carrington. I didn't mention younger actors because I don't keep up with them, and it wouldn't be relevant to compare. I think I look decent, but I'm not the type to be on the cover of a romance novel. My wife Lila and I have been married for 22 years. We have 2 daughters, Aria and Sienna. Aria is married, and Sienna is a senior in college. Lila is about 55, weighing no more than 135 pounds, with long blonde hair that touches her shoulders. She's very attractive, with a figure that draws attention, and she's always been known for being incredibly sweet. Almost everyone likes her. For the past 18 months, she's worked as a secretary for our pastor, Reverend Nate Brooks. Now, back to last Friday. I had some extra time during lunch and thought I'd surprise Lila by taking her out. I parked near the side entrance of the church offices because it was raining. When I arrived, she wasn't in her office, but I walked in anyway. As I stood there, I overheard Lila talking to Pastor Nate in his office. She sounded excited about Monday night and was looking forward to spending time together. Because of my job covering Monday Night Football, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Their conversation got intimate, discussing booking a room at the La Quinta Inn and expressing their longing for each other. The shock, nausea, and rising anger I felt were overwhelming. I had to leave before I did something reckless. It took everything in me to walk away, but I couldn't confront them then. Even though I wanted to, I feared acting impulsively and regretting it later. I snuck out the same way I came in, hoping they didn't notice. They had security cameras, but I entered through a side door that probably wasn't monitored. Driving away, it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was so shaken that I knew I couldn't be productive for the rest of the day. I called the station, said I wasn't feeling well, and headed home. I needed time to think, and home seemed the best place for that. Lila wouldn't be back until after 4 p.m., so I had time to gather my thoughts. It was clear Lila was having an affair with Pastor Nate. To me, he was no longer Reverend Nate, but Bastard Nate. I needed to understand the extent of their relationship, how long it had been going on, and why it started. Some might not want these details, but I needed to know. I had to understand why this happened in my supposedly great marriage. Lila clearly didn't see our marriage the way I did. She wasn't who I thought she was. I decided to uncover everything and face the situation head on. I wasn't weak, and I would deal with both of them. At home, I made a pot of coffee and sat on the patio to think. The fresh air helped clear my mind. I knew I'd figure it out eventually, but I needed to calm down first. I won't deny I cried that afternoon. While I understood I didn't own Lila or her body, it was devastating to think she'd be intimate with someone else after vowing herself to me. Some might not take those vows seriously, but I did, and I believe she did too. Going through this made me question my values and wonder if I'd been naive to believe in fidelity and love. The worst part of infidelity isn't the act itself. It's losing belief in your partner and everything they say or do. You lose trust in them, the foundation of your marriage, leaving you feeling exposed and afraid. Despite being 63 inches and 190 pounds, I felt vulnerable and scared. The betrayal of a cheating spouse is a unique kind of pain that hits harder than anything else. Sitting there, overwhelmed by my emotions, I tried to stay composed. I started to recall past suspicions I had ignored because I trusted Lila completely. Now all those little things that seemed insignificant before weighed heavily on me. How could I have been so blind? The answer was trust. I had trusted her implicitly, and now that trust was in pieces. Those minor clues had coalesced into a burden that was nearly unbearable. I needed answers. I wanted to know why this happened, how long it had been going on, how frequent it was, where it took place, and if anyone else was involved. My trust was obliterated, but I was determined to get to the bottom of this. My marriage, once seemingly perfect, was now a lie, and I had to face that reality. But first I needed clarity. Not ready to confront Lila yet, and not wanting to reveal my suspicions prematurely, I left the house around 3 p.m. to avoid being there when she returned. I drove into town, stopped by the station to pick up some essentials for the next few days, and had a quick chat with my boss about needing some personal time off early in the week. He was understanding, so I headed to Frankie's to kill time. At 5 p.m., I called Lila to tell her I wouldn't be home for dinner. She was irritated, saying she was in the mood and had plans for the evening, but if I didn't come home, those plans were off. As if I'd want to be with her, knowing she'd been with bastard Nate. She could take care of herself for all I cared. I told her, "Sweetheart, I've already planned to stop by, so just stay excited for me, and I'll take care of you when I get back." That was sure to provoke her. She snapped back, "Don't count on it, pal. If you think you can treat me like that, you won't be getting any action for a while." That's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to touch her until I figured out what was going on, and maybe never again. I got home around 10:30 p.m., quite drunk, but not too drunk to notice the bedroom door was locked. I smirked and banged on the door, guessing she was still awake. I yelled, "Fine, if that's how you want it, don't expect me to tend to your needs. Just suffer then." I headed for the spare bedroom, knowing she'd be furious. It would give me a break from having to explain why I didn't want to be intimate with her. The next morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I walked in. The chill in the air was palpable as her stare pierced through me. If I hadn't known about her infidelity, her look would have sent shivers down my spine. I grinned at her and said, "No need to get up and make breakfast, honey. I'll grab something on my way to golf." I left through the kitchen door, tossed my clubs in the trunk, and drove off. Shortly after, my phone rang. Seeing it was her, I ignored it. A few minutes later, I checked the message. She was livid. "You jerk! How could you do this to me? Get back here right now, bastard!" No, that was bastard Nate, not me. If anyone deserved that title, it was him. I had no intention of golfing. It just bought me some time. Instead, I drove straight to my former church. Did she think I'd ever want to hear bastard Nate preach again? It was early, so I knew no one would be around, and I was right. I entered the building. Yes, we had a key because Lila worked there. And headed straight to the offices. My goal was to plant remote micro cameras and mini microphones in her office and in bastard Nate's office. It didn't take long to set everything up, and I hid the transmitter behind old hymnals in the supply closet across the hall. The receiver was wired into my car's electrical system, allowing me to monitor their conversations and activities whenever they were in their offices. While I didn't expect much action at the church, I was sure that a few days of eavesdropping would yield some valuable information. After ensuring everything was working correctly, I rifled through her desk but found nothing significant. However, I did notice a prominent asterisk on her calendar for Monday, which matched what I'd overheard on Friday. I prepared accordingly. Next, I combed through Bastard Nate's office, but found little until a last-minute inspiration struck me. Since I was in a church, I checked the filing cabinets for receipts of church expenditures. Sure enough, I found a file containing receipts for the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. Some were from late 2023, and others from the spring of 2024. Knowing I was pushing my luck by staying too long, I quickly copied the receipts and restored everything to its original state before leaving. I drove to the golf course, parked in my usual spot, and entered the clubhouse to make sure my presence was noted. I settled at a table, nursing a Sprite for a couple of hours, going over the bills. I realized the two from late 2023 were both on Mondays, coinciding with dates when I attended conferences at CBS headquarters in New York. What enraged me the most was Bastard Nate's audacity to charge those rooms to the church under the guise of conference room rental for meetings. He was having an affair with my wife in a motel, and I had unknowingly footed the bill. Despite our financial contributions to the church, I vowed never to give another dime. Their situation was dire, and with just a bit more evidence, their fate would be sealed. I was certain this had been going on for nearly a year, if not longer, aligning with earlier suspicions. My hunch was that Bastard Nate had been involved with Lila even before she started working for him. Initially, she had a good position at the Telfor Corporation as a receptionist. However, she jumped at the chance to work for the church, citing its proximity to home and her desire to serve. She claimed the pay was similar to her previous job, but it was clear she was enticed by the extra perks. My anger grew with every passing minute. I couldn't believe how naive I had been. It infuriated me and made me sick to realize the woman I had cherished throughout our marriage could betray me so easily. I was determined to make them pay. Feeling it was time to dig deeper into my investigation, I retrieved my iPod from the car and tuned it to pick up the frequency of the receiver I had placed in the trunk. As I scrolled through the data, I watched as Bastard Nate entered his office and dialed a number. I regretted not bugging his phone directly, knowing I would only hear one side of the conversation, but I decided it was better than nothing. I listened as Nate spoke. "Yes, Lila, I'm at the church. I came right after you called. What's troubling you so much?" There was a pause, presumably for Lila's reply, which I couldn't hear. Nate continued his questioning. "Oh, really? Has he acted like this before?" There was another pause while Lila responded. Nate pressed further. "I see. What do you think set him off this time?" Another silence indicated Lila was explaining. Nate sounded worried. "You don't think he suspects anything between us, do you?" After another pause, Nate chuckled. "Well, you can get back at him on Monday night." He hung up the phone and sat in thought. Just before I turned off the receiver, I caught him muttering something under his breath. I made sure to record that, thinking it might come in handy later. With the transmission over, I headed home, expecting a frosty reception. I busied myself with chores, mowing the lawn and cleaning the basement, to keep my mind off things. Lila was silent when I entered the house, but the tension was palpable. During dinner, she finally spoke up, unable to contain herself. "Elliot, what's going on with you lately? Why have you been acting so strange?" I shot back, "Lila. Considering you locked me out of our bedroom last night, maybe you should think about your actions. I rarely go out with the guys, and the one time I do, you lose it. This is on you." She exploded. "Damn you!" I kept my cool. "Is that how a devout Christian woman talks? Your behavior doesn't reflect your so-called beliefs." Her face showed clear guilt, thick enough for anyone to see. How she thought I wouldn't notice is beyond me. She managed to recover and excused herself from the table, but I knew when I revealed the truth, she wouldn't recover so easily. Later, she came into the family room where I was watching Fox News, trying to find some balanced coverage. Her eyes looked puffy, as if she'd been crying. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and when I went to bed, I headed straight to the spare room. A few minutes later, she stood in the doorway. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Aren't you going to join me in bed?" she replied. "Nope. You made it clear that intimacy is off the table, so I'm sleeping alone to get a good night's rest," I said. She stormed out in tears. I felt nothing. Sunday morning, she woke me at 8 a.m. dressed for church and asked if I was going with her. "No, I'm staying home today. You go ahead and play the perfect church lady," I said. She looked hurt but composed herself before leaving. I heard her car drive off shortly after. She tried to talk to me later, but I brushed her off, telling her to leave me alone. We spent the rest of the day in our separate spaces. Monday morning, I left the house without seeing or speaking to her. As I was leaving, my phone rang. Tearfully, she apologized, saying she loved me and hated the situation. "We'll talk when I get home tonight," I said and hung up. I told my boss I'd be off for the day but would handle the Monday night football game as planned. He was pleased and asked if I was okay. I gave a non-committal, as good as can be expected. My next stop was the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. In the lobby, I approached a young man named Kevin at the check-in desk. I laid it all out, telling him I suspected my wife of cheating and that she'd likely be there that night with another man. Despite his initial skepticism, I offered him a deal. Let me place a microphone in the room, and I'd give him a couple of Falcons tickets. He bargained for 4, and I agreed, knowing I could get them through the station. He handed me the key to the only Whirlpool suite available. He had no idea I planned to install not just microphones, but also micro cameras like the ones I had set up in the church offices. I also bugged the phone line to capture both sides of their conversations. After setting up, I tested the equipment to ensure clear transmission and good views of both the Whirlpool and the bed. Satisfied, I made sure everything was well hidden and left the room. I handed the key back to Kevin at the front desk. "Thanks, Kevin. Hope everything goes smoothly. Enjoy the game." With time to kill, I tackled several tasks. I went to the bank and got cashier's checks for half the money in our checking and savings accounts. I canceled our joint credit cards. Next, I called my broker and set up a meeting after lunch to adjust our investment accounts. He assured me everything would be ready. I then contacted my attorney to discuss divorce proceedings and other matters, scheduling an appointment for later that day. Finally, I drove to Planter National Bank in Marietta, Georgia, opened new accounts in my name, and deposited the cashier's checks. I had lunch in Marietta, though I barely ate. Afterward, I went to my broker's office to review the documents he had prepared. We split our investment portfolio equally, avoiding the need to sell assets and incur tax liabilities. All that remained was for Lila and me to sign the papers. Taking the documents, I headed to my attorney. We went over the divorce papers he had drafted, preparing for the next steps. I decided to go for a no-fault divorce, aiming for an equal split of assets if Lila signed the papers quickly. However, if she hesitated, I instructed my attorney to include a provision for filing on grounds of adultery. I was confident she would sign without delay. With everything arranged, I grabbed a quick dinner before heading to the station for the Monday night football broadcast. After leaving the attorney's office, I turned my cell phone back on and found a few messages from Lila. In her messages, she expressed concern about my behavior and urged me to come home so we could talk before the game. Reading her words, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Even knowing her plans for the evening, she still reached out with words of love and worry. It struck me how naive I had been to trust her so completely. I made a decision. The only chance of salvaging our marriage was if she didn't show up at the motel tonight. If she chose not to go, it would show she cared enough to try to fix things. At 8 p.m., I set the automated system for the evening's broadcast, ensuring Monday Night Football was on the air. Meanwhile, I prepared to monitor my setup at the motel room remotely. At precisely 8:15, Nate entered the room and made a phone call. "Hey, I'm here. Can you come over as soon as possible?" he said into the phone. "I'll be there shortly," was the reply. After the call ended, he muttered something else, which I noted to review later. This could be the end of my marriage, I thought, although I doubted any change in our situation. The pain was real, fueling my resolve for some form of retribution. I went through my list of contacts, reaching out to each one. It took a while, but eventually I contacted everyone necessary. By that time, Lila had arrived at the motel, so I turned my attention back to the surveillance. Their conversation was intimate and personal, revealing the depth and secrecy of their relationship. The reality of their involvement was far from what anyone would expect, given their public personas. Listening to them, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. The discovery was shocking, considering their roles in the community. It was a moment of realization about the extent of their actions and the impact on everyone involved. I felt sick. My wife, a pastor, and a church secretary engaged in such deceit. As I listened, I realized just how twisted they were. Tonight, they would get what they deserved. Lila was on the bed in a compromising position, clearly ready for an intimate encounter. The camera caught every detail, including the anticipation on her face just before they got physical. Her exclamations were a mix of passion and surprise. "Oh, this is intense," she might have said, her voice reflecting the depth of their engagement. "This is what I needed," she added, affirming her participation. He responded with boldness. "This will be unforgettable." Her reactions were vocal, a series of sounds conveying her intense experience. "Keep going, this is what I want," she urged, nearing her peak of emotion. His final movements were decisive, marking a moment of closure for them, a moment that symbolized the end of one chapter for me and the beginning of another, filled with pain and a thirst for revenge. After a brief pause, they resumed with renewed energy. Her reactions were vocal and repetitive, indicating the intensity of her experience. It was clear that what transpired was beyond my ability to comprehend fully. Her satisfaction was something I could never provide in the same way. This realization was crushing, highlighting a disparity in our desires and capacities. The performance continued beyond what I could bear to watch. As they paused for a break, the reality of their connection and my exclusion from it sank in deeper. Determined to act, I switched the broadcast to a mode that would reveal their actions to a wider audience. Driven by a mix of hurt and a desire for vindication, I was ready to face the consequences of exposing their hidden truth. I dialed Lila's number, my heart pounding as the dial tone echoed. On the other end, I could almost picture her glancing at the caller ID with a dismissive smirk. "It's Elliot," Lila probably said to Nate, her voice laced with defiance. "I'm not answering. Let's see how he likes that. Keep going, honey, while he's on the line." Frustrated, I disconnected and tried again, my determination growing. This time, Lila seemed to reconsider. "Guess I better take it," she mumbled before answering. "Hello, Elliot," she said, her tone cold and unwelcoming. "Lila, where are you? What are you doing?" I asked, seeking any hint of truth in her voice. "I decided to go shopping since you didn't call earlier. Now I'm just grabbing a bite before heading home," she lied smoothly, her words a stark contrast to the reality I knew. "Shopping at this hour?" I pressed, skepticism evident in my voice. "Yeah, and I plan to splurge," she retorted, defiance in her tone. "Fantastic, Lila. Thanks for being such a wonderful wife," I replied, the sarcasm in my voice barely concealing the pain. "Don't talk to me like that, you jerk. I don't know what's gotten into you. Goodbye," she snapped, ending the call with finality. As I pondered their ongoing betrayal, a plan formed in my mind. Instead of calling Lila directly again, I decided to interrupt their tryst by contacting the motel. "Kevin, it's Elliot. Are you watching Monday Night Football?" I asked casually. "No, why?" he responded, curious. "Well, you might want to start. Could you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" I requested, masking my turmoil with casual conversation. After a moment of silence, Nate's voice came through. "Hey, what do you want, Elliot?" It was time to confront them. "Bastard Nate, put Lila on the phone," I demanded, my anger barely contained. Lila's confused voice followed. "Elliot, why are you calling here?" "Lila, I know everything. The affair, the lies. I'm filing for divorce and you're out of my life. And Nate, you're going to pay for this too," I declared, my voice steady and resolute. "What's wrong with you, Elliot? I can't understand you lately," she shot back, her confusion evident. "It's over, Lila. Maybe you should tune into Monday Night Football for a change. Enjoy the show. Goodbye," I said, hanging up, the finality of my decision sinking in. On the live monitor, I watched her turn on the TV and see the shocking video of her and Nate. As the reality of what the entire Atlanta area was witnessing dawned on her, she began to panic. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she repeated, hastily dressing and fleeing the room. Nate was right behind her, cursing. "I'll destroy that son of a bitch," he muttered. He'd better watch what he says. It could come back to haunt him. Once they were gone, I powered down the monitors and let the video play out. Then I switched off the live assist mode and returned the system to full automation. Grabbing the tape, I left the broadcast booth for what was likely the last time, taking a few personal items from my desk. Now you're caught up. I spent the rest of the night at Frankie's bar, and yes, my halftime show was the hot topic. After the game, I hailed a cab home. Lila was sitting in the dark living room when I arrived, the phone off the hook, tears streaming down her face. She wept, but I felt nothing. It was over for me. "How could you do this to me, Elliot?" she sobbed. "After all these years together, how?" "No, Lila," I countered. "The real question is, how could you do this to me? I'm drunk. I'm going to bed. We'll talk tomorrow." She stayed on the sofa, and the next morning she was still there, looking exhausted. It seemed she hadn't slept, but I didn't care. She brought this on herself. I put the phone back on the hook, and it immediately began to ring. For the next hour and a half, I fielded calls from family, friends, church members, my former boss, and both of my daughters. They were deeply disturbed by what they saw, and nothing I said could soothe them. I understood it was harsh for them, but they're adults and will eventually move on. Mrs. Nate called too, asking if I had a tape of the incident. I assured her I kept a copy safe and would provide it if needed. Clearly, everyone I contacted had seen the Monday Night Football halftime show. Some were upset about its explicit content, while others, like her parents, criticized me for exposing her. However, most were supportive and sympathetic, recognizing the difficulty of the situation. It was a challenging experience, but a consequence I had to face for my actions. Lila remained tearful throughout. Eventually, I took the phone off the hook again and made myself coffee. Returning, I offered her some and presented the divorce papers and investment documents for her to sign. "I'm filing for divorce, Lila," I said firmly. "After what I saw last night, it's clear you've been unfaithful for a long time. I can't stay in this marriage knowing that. The documents I've prepared are for a no-fault divorce, and I'm proposing we split everything equally. I need you to sign the divorce papers and the agreement on how we'll divide our investments today. There's no room for negotiation. The terms are fair. You have until 5 p.m. today to get legal advice and agree to my terms. If you don't, after 5:01 p.m., I'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery and seek a division of property that reflects our individual contributions and earnings, which would benefit me. This is your best option. Contesting this would be unwise. It will become public knowledge in Atlanta, and you'll be exposed for what you've done with Nate. Consider this carefully, Lila. Take this offer. It's the best way forward for both of us." "Elliot, I still love you. I want to fix our marriage. Can't we try to work things out?" Lila pleaded. "The problem isn't about love, Lila. It's about your choices and actions. You put someone else before our marriage, and I can't overlook that. You need to sort this out and talk to your lawyer as soon as possible." After some time, Lila came back with the documents signed. "My lawyer reviewed everything and agrees that your offer is fair under the circumstances," she informed me, her voice carrying a mix of resignation and hope. "Elliot, is there any chance we could talk? I'd like to explain myself and see if there's any possibility for us to reconcile," she added, looking for a glimmer of hope. I decided to hear her out, curious about her reasoning and whether this was an isolated incident or indicative of deeper issues in our relationship. We sat at the kitchen table, and she began to recount everything. She admitted it began just before she started working for Nate. She couldn't quite explain why, as she claimed to have been happy with me, but something about Nate drew her in, maybe his charisma. She genuinely believed he loved her. I acknowledged that Nate had a certain charm, but I shattered her illusion by playing 2 recordings I had saved. The first was from that initial day. That foolish woman better keep her affair with me hidden from her husband. Despite her willingness, she'll be gone soon. It was easy to seduce her, but she needs to go. The second was from just before her arrival. I'll ravage her tonight and fire her tomorrow. If she protests, I'll threaten to expose her to Elliot. I can't risk him finding out. Lila, you not only destroyed our marriage but completely misjudged Nate's feelings. To him, you were just a plaything, a disposable fling. I saw how he treated you, and how you seemed to enjoy it. I could never satisfy you like that because I saw you as my wife, not an object. There's no way I can stay married to you. You broke our vows, and I can't ignore that. Plus, you'd never be happy with me again. The damage is too deep." She sat there, tears streaming down her face, acknowledging the painful truth in my words. Eventually, she signed the papers. I informed her that I'd be relocating and gave her time to find new accommodations. Financially, I doubted she could maintain the house, and I had no desire to stay there, surrounded by memories. Our agreement was to sell the house and split the proceeds equally. After gathering my papers in pre-packed bags, I left, dropping off documents at my broker's before settling in a hotel for the night. The following day, I met with my attorney, who promptly filed the divorce papers with the county superior court. We also tackled my legal issues at the station and with the FCC. He outlined potential consequences, including hefty fines and career setbacks. While jail seemed unlikely, significant financial penalties were probable, signaling an end to my broadcasting career. Within days, the repercussions hit hard. The FCC served me, initiating a legal battle that drained my savings, nearly equivalent to a year's salary. Worse, my broadcast license was revoked, barring me from my profession for 2 years. The silver lining came from TT, who, despite my spiteful actions, offered me a job with duties that complied with FCC restrictions. TT had some sympathy for me, likely influenced by his own bitter divorce experience. Nate confronted me once at Frankie's, seemingly ready for a fight. I ended up pinning him down, asserting my dominance. "Listen, Nate, I don't want to hear from you again. Is that clear?" "Forget you," he spat back. "Maybe you need another reminder," I said, nudging him in the ribs. "Nate, I have a recording of you threatening me. If I take it to the police, I could get a restraining order and press assault charges. With that evidence, you might end up in prison. Is that what you want?" He shook his head, refusing. I delivered one final kick for good measure. "Well, I suppose this ends our conversation." Though no longer a pastor, Nate remains a despicable person. He was ousted from the church, and his ordination was revoked. Last I heard, he found a job at a travel agency. Despite his charisma, Hell struggled to make ends meet, especially since his wife successfully sued him for divorce on grounds of adultery, resulting in a substantial settlement against him. My incriminating tape likely played a significant role in her victory. I'm moving forward with my life. While it's not perfect, I'm finding ways to be happy. I've casually dated a few women in recent months but haven't committed to any serious relationships. I've abstained from sexual activity, believing in reserving it for marriage, steadfast in my values despite others' opinions. When I find the right partner, I'll marry her and experience the joys of intimacy as intended. I'm patient, confident that the right person will come along, and I'm willing to wait. I occasionally see Lila at family events like Sienna's college graduation and Aria's baby's baptism. While I maintain civility, I've made it clear that my presence isn't for her. I'm not interested in friendship or any connection. It's evident she's not content. I sense her emotional turmoil from our breakup, and she likely regrets her actions. However, her regret doesn't change the fact that she betrayed our marriage by being with another man. While some might forgive such transgressions, my moral code is firm, leaving no room for leniency. She'll have to live with the knowledge that she sacrificed our life together for her affair with Nate. Despite my profound love for her, she discarded it all. Moreover, her involvement in the infamous Monday Night Football incident has irreparably tarnished her reputation. Everyone who witnessed it now views her as promiscuous. I've heard she receives numerous date offers, but to her credit, she hasn't accepted any. It must be agonizing to know that most of these men see her as nothing more than a conquest. It's not a dignified way to live, but it's a consequence of her actions. She brought it upon herself.